Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we have the Cold Steel GoldenEye. This will be my full review, so some of you may have been waiting for this because you saw the first impressions a little while ago. I have had quite a few chances to use and carry this knife and want to go ahead and share with you what my overall take is on it. This of course is new for 2017, and I've talked about this knife a couple of other times. In addition to the first impressions, this was also one of the knives I expressed interest in the most anticipated, I think is what the title was, Cold Steels for this year. And I'll put that video at the end if you want to go back and watch that to see what other models I was interested in. This is the Tanto, and that's mostly because I just didn't have any Tantos in my collection. So I saw it's available in Tanto and Drop Point, and I went with the Tanto just to change things up a little bit. This knife does fit nicely into this sort of vein of knives that Cold Steel seems to do really well, where they're kind of slim, they're lightweight, and very well put together. So you end up getting a lot of utility and a lot of strength in a fairly easy to carry package, and certainly that's true of this guy. So let's go ahead now with size and weight and discuss a little bit about how well this actually does carry. 8 3/8 overall, 3.5 inch blade, 5 inch handle. Now, one thing that's worth noticing on this knife, sorry about that, I've got my other hand full, so I needed two hands. One thing that's worth noticing here is that this knife is a little thicker than we're used to seeing for a knife of this size. The hole here does the same thing that it often does with Spyderco's. It makes the knife wider or thicker in this dimension. So it's 1 7/8 inches, so almost 2 inches there, which is a little bigger. Now it makes up for that by being quite slim at around 3/8 of an inch. And the weight on this guy is 4.3 ounces. So fairly comfortable to carry, certainly not deep carry. Okay, the clip is quite a ways down here, and I will say that's one of the complaints that I have. I know we're not talking about the clip yet, but I wish they would have found a different way to attach that clip. So now that you've got size, weight, and carry out of the way, as I say, it is very comfortable and does give a lot of utility. As a side note, I've even carried this in sort of workout pants, you know, the thin Under Armour pants, and been quite comfortable. It didn't feel like I had a brick or anything in my pocket. Okay, getting on to the blade now. We have a Tanto blade shape with a hollow grind, S35 VN steel, satin finish. I love the way they've done the opposing grind lines. So the grind lines are running this direction on the flat, and then that direction on the hollow grind or on the primary bevel. Really attractive. Sorry guys, I've gotten a lot of glare. The sun has changed since I started this video and it's kind of messing with me a little, but we're gonna press on. Okay, so really nice looking blade. And I guess that's a little bit subjective, but I've got to say I like what they've done here. Notice there are a couple little scratches on here. I have put some use on this guy. I will say this, Tanto blades I find are actually quite good for EDC. Now, where they're limited is if you get out in the woods and you're doing, you know, skinning tasks or certain carving tasks, not so much. But for the around the house sort of EDC type of tasks, opening packages, cutting boxes, those kinds of things, that secondary tip really works well to get a lot of those sort of utility tasks done. And as is true of most Cold Steels, this is nice and thin behind the edge, so really good slicer. And I have cut up some apples and stuff with it, it works fine for that. But a drop point is a little nicer because that secondary tip tends to get in the way as you're, you know, imagine yourself trying to cut, you know, this way. Right where you'd want it to be round, it's got a tip. So it does limit you a little bit if you do a lot of food prep with your EDC, but otherwise, I don't normally do food prep with my EDC, so it works really well. And of course, adds some extra utility for those other cutting tasks. Also, by the way, the purpose of a Tanto is it does add quite a bit of strength at the tip. So yeah, blade I think is a real win. If you're not a fan of Tantos, there is a drop point available in this. By the way, if you're not a fan of this color scheme, there's also sort of a black and silver color scheme that you can go with as well. Let's talk about the lock. Of course, it's the Triad lock, which we're fairly familiar with. Very strong lock. And this one's a little stiff, although that'll probably change over time. And even in the time that I've had this, probably 2 or 3 months, it's already changed a little. It is very smooth. One of the things I've noticed in general about Cold Steel over the last couple of years, I have a lot of newer Cold Steels from 2015 and beyond that you can see these are pretty much drop shut knives, and that was not the case when I first started getting cold steel. So they seem to have really upped the level of quality, upped the tolerances, and I've got to give some credit for that. When it comes to the lockup and deployment of this knife, the big consideration, of course, is the HTR, the hollow thumb ramp. Now, the way it's implemented in this knife, I'm not crazy about how it leaves this gap, and the reason I don't like that gap is because, so if the knife is open, imagine you put it in your pocket, well, you've got a little hole there with a bit of a catch on it that seems to be just custom made to catch on any kind of lint or crap, or even if you have keys or something in your pocket, there's a space there that stuff can get in. Now, my experience carrying this, it's not been a problem. So, this is one of those reviewer theoretical issues that has yet to actually manifest itself in real life, but I could see it being a problem. Okay, so let's just put it that way. To be fair, I haven't actually had a problem with it, but I could see it being a problem. Now let's talk about the hollow thumb ramp. And in terms of just use, okay, how easy it is to get a hold of, how easy it is to open and close the knife, I actually like the hollow thumb ramp. It's comfortable, and what I like about it is I have lots of fairly grippy thumb studs and different things like that, okay? What's cool about this is it's got a really positive grip on your thumb. It really holds on. It's large enough though that it kind of spreads the force out enough that even though it's very grippy and almost even a little aggressive, it doesn't cause any discomfort. It doesn't cause any like sort of chafing or catching or anything like that. So, whatever you think about the looks of the HTR, which, that's kind of dumb. It's just a hollow thumb ramp. Whatever you think about the looks of it, I will say that it's actually really comfortable to actuate. So I'm a fan of it from an ergonomic standpoint. And even I'm not sure how I feel about the looks, although I don't hate it, okay? So hollow thumb ramp works for me. And is it an improvement over, your standard sort of thumb stud on a cold steel? A little. It's not amazing, right? It's not that thumb studs are just terrible and everyone dislikes them and we really needed another option. But this is another option and it does work well. So that's my take on the HTR. Let's go ahead now and talk about the handle. It's a fairly thin handle. It is all G10, which does make things pretty light. The grip on this is, I would compare it to your average Spyderco. If you've got a PM2, if you've got an American Lawman, a newer version of the American Lawman, if you've got a Broken Skull, it's the same sort of texture pattern they're using on all of those knives. So very grippy. It does work. It's just not as sort of aggressive and heavy as the brick pattern G10 we're used to seeing on, say, the Recon 1 or Talwar or things like that. All right, so nice and grippy. The ergonomics seem fine, and I've handed this knife to a few other people just to see, when you get the full 4 choils there, for some people with really thick, really fat fingers or even really skinny fingers, those 4 spots can be annoying because they don't match your fingers exactly. They match my fingers pretty well, and I've handed this to a few other people and they seem to be okay. So, no one has really complained about it. The other thing I like is this is not ideal as a finger choil, but I have used it and it definitely gives you enough room that you can choke up for fine cutting tasks, okay? Jimping. One thing I feel like is missing is you've got a thumb ramp here. It just feels like it should have some jimping on it and it doesn't, which is, maybe a little bit of an oversight. It would have been nice to have a bit of jimping right there, and I feel like it really could have locked you in even more. Now the handle is plenty grippy, and I'm not concerned about like dropping this knife or sliding up on the blade or anything, but just for a little extra tactile, feedback and a little extra control, some jimping on that thumb ramp would have been appreciated. As I say though, not having it doesn't ruin it or anything like that. Typical cold steel issue, you do have some screws going into aluminum, which is not awesome, but I've never had problems with it. Otherwise, I don't really have, it's a thin handle, it's fairly well put together. Let's move on to the last point that is kind of staring you right in the face here, and that is the clip. Okay, now in terms of just function alone, the clip is great. It's a spring clip. It's a little nicer than a lot of cold steels. It doesn't have, because there's a little extra distance here, see this distance here is a little longer, and because of that, it's not quite as stiff as some of the cold steels you're used to experiencing probably. So it goes in and out of pocket pretty easily. Okay, so that's a win. Where I really have a problem is the way that they've attached this. You know, it's kind of like the Spyderco Tenacious, and I don't like it on the Tenacious either. And it just, because it's like so gold, okay, and it stands out, it makes it way more noticeable than it would normally be by putting this huge attachment portion on here. I wish they would have done just about anything else. Even, you know, here's the American Lawman that I've got for comparison. Why not just do this? Okay, this is fine. This just seems like, I don't know, overkill or something. So I'm not a fan of the way they've attached it. Otherwise, though, the clip works. I just don't like the way this looks, okay? Lanyard hole is there, and it's pretty small, but I'm sure with a little effort, you could probably get some 550 cord through it. Now, let's go ahead and bring in some comparisons, okay? And, you know, this, as I said, is a nice, lightweight, very utilitarian knife. Another, probably my favorite option in the cold steel lineup along these lines is the American Lawman. If you're watching this and you don't have an American Lawman, I highly, highly recommend one. They are, you know, they're comfortable. The blade shape is just phenomenal. That very high hollow grind means you get a really thin, slicey edge. Just a great knife. Total win on the American Lawman. And this, you're not getting a whole lot more, but you are getting a little bigger blade. So that is a bit of a drawback. What else have we got here? Here, of course, is the Recon 1. Again, this is, for me, this is a standard from Cold Steel. Just a great, very large, very heavy-duty tactical blade. Great knife. I really, really like it. I feel like it's a sort of a standard in that sort of defensive blade sort of genre. And it's, of course, quite a bit bigger and has some maybe a little extra utility because of its extra size. Just for fun, here is the Cold Steel 4MAX. Dwarfs every other knife. And of course, you know, this is not a practical comparison. I don't think I wouldn't recommend that anyone buy this as their primary EDC knife, but there it is anyway, just to give a little extra variety. Now let's bring in a couple of Spydercos. Obvious, whenever you're talking about an EDC knife, it's important to bring in a paramilitary too. Just a great sort of standard for EDC, much loved. And in terms of hard use and in terms of being a tactical blade, the Manix 2XL, again, a great option. One thing I will say, guys, these comparisons, it just so happened that the comparisons I have here are all knives that I absolutely adore. Really, really great knives. Every single one that I've just had on the table here is highly recommended. In terms of this knife, what do I think? Well, I think it's a very well put together knife. I think it's interesting in the looks. And I will say, this is a knife that I've gotten some comments on. People are like, wow, that's a nice knife. Where, you know, if I was carrying this on that particular day, I don't think I would have gotten that same response. So this one, I think, appeals to the person who wants something a little different, that wants a design that has some creativity to it and has something a little different. I will say this. I kind of like the fact that Cold Steel has gone in this direction with a few of their models. You know, it's easy as a knife company to just become stale. And so certainly this is something different. It's very functional, so I can't really, even though you may not feel as strongly about the looks, there's no question that everything on this knife works in the way that it's supposed to, okay? So I can't really take away any points for that. Do we have a well put together, highly functional knife here? Yes, absolutely. As I say, the looks may not appeal to everyone, but if they appeal to you, this is definitely a well-built knife, and I wouldn't hesitate to pick one up. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will talk to you soon.